Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is supported by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Telecommunications Access Minnesota, and Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and online at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents. This is our last show of the season. We'll be taking a little break for the summer and come back with a whole bunch of new shows next fall. So thank you for joining us for our last program. And actually, the last program is focusing on one of our most important resources in Minnesota. We've done a few shows about this before, but I don't think we ever get enough information out there, and we're talking about water, Minnesota's most important resource. And my guest this evening is Paula West, who is the Executive Director of the Leech Lake Area Watershed Foundation. She's very, very knowledgeable, has been in this business a long time, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ray.
Maybe we could start out just by talking a little bit about what is the Leech Lake Area Watershed Foundation.
The Leech Lake Area Watershed Foundation is a nonprofit that's located in Hackensack, Minnesota, and our mission is to promote activities that are going to sustain and preserve the natural resources of the Leech Lake watershed, which is a fairly large area of Minnesota that encompasses most of Cass County, the western third of Hubbard County, and a very small portion of Beltrami County.
Now, in addition to that Watershed Foundation, your job now, you have pretty broad background across the state of Minnesota. One of your jobs was with the Minnesota Lakeshore Owners Association. Is that the correct title?
Minnesota Lakes Association.
Minnesota Lakes Association. So you worked with groups wherever there's lakes in the whole state of Minnesota.
That's right, Ray. Yes, I've been working on lake protection for many years and was previously the Executive Director of the Minnesota Lakes Association, which is now known as Minnesota Waters, and still doing great work with lakeshore associations. Worked with state government, local government, and lake associations all over the state.
And I know those partnerships that are developed through the DNR and foundations and private citizens are really crucial, and becoming more so now that we're losing funding for so many of our state-funded programs. The things that you're doing, I think, are just vitally important to maintaining a good, healthy water quality in our state. What is a watershed? Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what a watershed is. We hear that term all over. I don't think a lot of people understand how broad and how significant a watershed really is.
That's right. It's one of those words you hear, but you don't really, if somebody asked you for a definition of it, you probably wouldn't know what that means. Well, a watershed is essentially an area of land that drains to a common water body. And that area of land, then, any activity that takes place in that area of land and water that runs off can also carry pollutants with it.
Now here you've got the Leech Lake itself, and that watershed is really a pretty large area around that, isn't it? How far out does that go, probably?
Well, that's right. The Leech Lake watershed is one of 87 major watersheds in Minnesota. And if we could see the slide of the drainage areas, you'll see that we have a number of watersheds in Minnesota. Most of the viewing area is in the upper Mississippi River watershed, which is one of 8 major water drainage areas in Minnesota. And so most of your viewing area is located in the upper Mississippi River water basin. But essentially what happens, take the Leech Lake watershed, for instance. Well, here we have the slide. If you see the brown area there in this slide, and where the little X's are, that's the Leech Lake watershed, and it is part of the upper Mississippi River basin, which is one of 8 drainage areas in Minnesota. And we have other drainage areas in Minnesota as well. But essentially in this part of Minnesota, all the water drains to the Mississippi River and eventually down to the Gulf of Mexico. So what happens here eventually can get down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so I think it's important to realize that, you know, we're part of a broader system of water that connects all of us.
And if you look at that map, there's no one really in the state that can say, well, I don't live by a watershed.
No, we all live in a watershed somewhere.
Right.
And within the Leech Lake watershed itself, it encompasses 855,000 acres. And of those 855,000 acres, 110,000 acres is Leech Lake itself, the third largest lake in Minnesota. And This is a very rich, natural resource-rich area of Minnesota. There are 380 lakes in the Leech Lake watershed. There's 320 miles of streams. There's 140,000 miles of wetlands. A third of the watershed is in public ownership. We have hundreds of thousands of forests. It's just one of Minnesota's primary recreation areas.
Something that I don't think I really thought about before, but Minnesota has no incoming water.
No, it really doesn't. You know, that surprises a lot of people. It's water, water everywhere. But we have no incoming sources of water in Minnesota except for precipitation. And we have water that goes out to the Hudson Bay through the Rainy and Red River Basin. And then, of course, we have the upper Mississippi River Basin where we were just talking about. That goes to the Mississippi. And then the Great Lakes Basin goes to the Atlantic. So while we have water, it all goes out. Well, we have a lot of water, but it's all leaving Minnesota.
That's interesting. How about the impact that water has on our state? I know that just with boating, for example, there's, I think, something like every 5 or 6 Minnesotans has a boat.
Yes, that's right, Ray.
That's a huge...
We are #1 per capita in the United States for the number of boats. I think the statistic is there's one boat for every 6 Minnesotans. Well, water is, really important to us. It's on our state quarter. It's on our license plates. We have 208,000 miles of shoreline in Minnesota. That's more than all the shoreline in Hawaii, Florida, and California combined. That's a lot of shoreline. And surface water comprises about 5% of the surface area of Minnesota. And it's important to our quality of life. I think most Minnesotans like to recreate on water, or they like the trails that are associated with our lake regions, or they hunt, they fish. It also sustains our economy, which is a really important point, I think, to make to people that, tourism is a #1 industry in Minnesota. It's an $11 billion industry in Minnesota. And think about it, what is tourism predicated on? It's predicated on, being able to enjoy our lakes and our trails and our forests and all the hunting, fishing, the bird watching, all the things that we do in these areas, these recreational areas of Minnesota. And, take fishing alone. It's a $1 billion industry. That's more than the revenues of the Mall of America in 1 year.
Wow. And now you were given, before we started the show, you were talking a little bit about the financial impact in just, for example, in Crow Wing County or Cass County. It's huge, isn't it? It's
huge. In Crow Wing County, I think the latest statistics from Explore Minnesota were something like $185 million in sales revenues a year. And in Cass County, it's a little less than that, around $120 million, but that's a huge industry. And it sustains our communities. The dollars that people spend when they come here circulate throughout our communities many times over. And so it's important to protect our natural resources and in this part of the state, particularly our lakes, because it draws people here to support our communities.
And this is a fast-growing area because of lakes, isn't it?
It absolutely is, Ray. You can see from this graphic, the important thing is to note the really dark red regions here of Minnesota. Those are the fastest growing regions of Minnesota outside of the Twin Cities. Cass County and Crow Wing County grew by twice the state average from 1990 to 2000. And the state demographers project that this north central region of Minnesota may grow up to 60% by the year 2030. Now, we all know with the current economy that slowed down quite a bit, but they will come, I'm sure of that, because of the baby boomers retiring, and we can work anywhere now with the internet, and we have good road systems to get up here, so there's a lot to attract people.
I spent a fair amount of time on lakes and rivers, and one of the things that I've just noticed over the last 4 or 5 years is many times as we've seen newspaper articles, television shows, about the importance of having buffer zones for water to try to improve the quality of water in our lakes.
Yes.
When you're driving along the lake shores, you still see some of the same old techniques. Lawns are mowed right to the edge, and that runoff is getting down into there, which is why I think it's so important to keep educating people about what we can do to stop this. Back in the 50s and the 40s, we had little cabins.
Yeah, we did, just like these that you see here on the screen. That's what dotted our shorelines. That's the kind of cabin I used to come to here in Minnesota. I grew up in Iowa, but we came to Brainerd area. But now this is what you see on some of the larger lakes, and this might be a sort of an exaggeration. But the point is that, you know, we've got a lot more development that's happening on the same amount of property. And when we disturb the land, then we have more opportunity for runoff, and with that can come pollutants and impacts to the water quality of our lakes.
So what are some of the key challenges that we're facing in our waters right now?
Well, I think some of the key challenges are balancing the growth that we want to come to our area, but also protecting those natural resources at the same time. And that means, you know, having regulations, both state and local regulations that are going to protect our shorelands, but also allow them to be developed where it's appropriate to develop them. And there are some shorelands that are so critical, are so sensitive, have such important habitat that, you know, we want to be careful not to develop those, but to develop where we can. And also, I know we're not going to talk about this evening, but aquatic invasive species is another huge issue facing the quality of our lakes today. So,
and not only the quality, but also the value of the property.
Yes, that's right.
I've seen pictures of some of the zebra mussels in the south end of Mille Lacs from last summer. It's incredible. I mean, it's like big piles of rocks, and they're just zebra mussels. They get on boat lifts, they get on anything that's stuck in the water.
That's right.
Even a boat that's parked there for 3 or 4 days can have them. And they're, I'm not sure what the technical name is, but their offspring are so tiny. That's what they call them, the villagers.
Villagers, yes.
They're so tiny that you really can't see them with your eyes.
No, they can just be in a drop of water. You can't see them with the naked eye. And, you know, that population has just grown exponentially in the last 3 or 4 years. So it's a huge problem facing our state, and we, you know, there is legislation to address it now. So that's another issue besides some of the water quality issues that we're facing.
And you've talked about types of actions that we would need to take to sustain the quality of our lakes. What are some of those kinds of things?
Well, Ray, I think there's 2 basic things that we need to do to protect our waters. Well, first of all, let's back up and just talk about the various things that do impact water quality. I mean, there's nature and there's precipitation. Rainfall itself has a lot of phosphorus in it, which is a natural pollutant. And then there's what we do on our own properties that can impact water quality. And then there's what everybody else does cumulatively on their properties around a lake. And then, of course, what happens on the land within the watershed can cumulatively have an impact on our waters. So, you know, it's up to us, as all of us as individuals, to do our part, what small things we can do to manage our properties well and to limit the amount of pollution that drains off of our own properties. And I think there's 2 main types of actions that are going to help us sustain our lakes in the future. One is land conservation, where we preserve that undeveloped shoreline that should not be developed because it's very sensitive and it has very vital habitat. And then there's good land management, just as individuals, you know, on our own properties doing what we can. And we'll talk a little bit more, I think, about some of those actions.
And I know the Leech Lake Foundation that you work with has some major accomplishments over the last 4 or 5 years. Would you just want to talk a little bit about what they are? Because I think it's really significant what you've done.
Yes, we're primarily a land conservation organization, although we do work with education on individual and community stewardship to protect our waters. But we are what is called a land trust, an organization that works on land protection. And that can happen one of 2 ways. Either land can be acquired or we can put easements on it. But since 1997, the Leech Lake Area Watershed Foundation has done 33 land conservation projects within the Leech Lake watershed. And we have protected 80,000 feet of shoreline. That's almost 15 miles
That's
of
really
shoreline.
significant.
Yes, it
It
is,
really
and
is.
more than 2,000 acres at a value of about $16 million.
Wow.
So that's very significant amount of protection that's taken place as a result of the actions of this organization, which I've only been with them for about 4 years now, but there's a very dedicated group of volunteer directors that have done most of this work. And Well, I do have a couple of examples to talk about. Mule Lake, Wildlife Management Area. This is Mule Lake right here. You can see where you see the caption. That is now a wildlife management area.
And this is south of Longville, right?
Yes, it's just south of Woman Lake, and clearly almost a half of the shoreline of this lake, the whole peninsula there and on around both sides of that 3 miles has been protected through the facilitation of a project to raise money, and through a partnership with 22 different partners to purchase this land from a conservation-minded landowner who owned all of that land.
Really?
And wanted
Wow.
to see it preserved and protected for the benefit of the public of Minnesota. And through the foundation's efforts, they raised over $100,000 in cash donations, which was then matched by our state Reinvest in Minnesota fund, and also other partners brought money to the table. And the DNR then ultimately purchased this land, and now it's owned and managed by the DNR for the benefit of the public to fish and hunt and picnic and hike and watch wildlife there. So it's
And how about the Lantern Bay on Woman Lake itself?
yes, Lantern Bay is a project that the foundation just finished. It was a 5-year project to protect this very shallow bay on Woman Lake. Woman Lake is an 8,000-acre lake, and this bay, Lantern Bay, is a 120-acre bay that's very shallow. It's very important for fish spawning. It's an area where migratory waterfowl rest there in their migration. They also feed there. There's a lot. This is a wild rice bed you can see right there, and there's a lot of loons that nest in there. And there was a large development of about 33 homes that was proposed on the north side of this bay. And so to protect that over the course of 5 years, the foundation was involved in actually acquiring 2 pieces of land and then selling that to the DNR, and then working with the DNR and landowners to, and the Lake Association, the Child, Girl, Woman Lake Association, to raise over $400,000 in private money to protect this bay. And now almost all of it is owned by the DNR. And again, the public can enjoy that. There's public access there. So this bay was kind of what we call the lungs and kidneys of the whole Woman Lake chain. So it was a very important project, and we're very proud of that.
Now, you've done a lot in mapping too, haven't you?
Yes, we've done a lot with acquisitions, but we're now starting to work more with conservation easements. That's just another tool to protect land. A conservation easement is when a private landowner wants to protect the conservation value of their property, and what they do is they basically give up the future development rights to their property. You know, when we own a piece of property, we have different bundles of rights we can do that we can do with our property. Well, the right to develop that is one bundle of rights, and so they give up that development right, and that development right is held by another organization. And we have been working with private landowners who are conservation-minded and want to see that their property is not developed in the future. This is mostly large, undeveloped pieces of property where if we keep it in its natural state, it protects the fish and wildlife habitat there, and it also limits the amount of runoff that comes off the property, so that it also helps protect water quality. Right now we're working with Cass County on a project that is funded by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, which is the money that comes from the lottery dollars, 40% of the lottery dollars. And landowners who want to participate in this grant program, it's a financial incentive program, they donate the easement or the development rights to their property, and the grant will pay for the closing costs on that. It's around $15,000 for a property owner. And we're targeting properties that are what are considered sensitive shoreland. And maybe I could tell your viewers just a little bit more about what sensitive shoreland is. The DNR has been involved in a project for the past 3 years in Cass County. It's a pilot project to identify the most important and critical shorelands to protect. And they went through a very rigorous science-based study that had 15 different habitat assessment criteria that they looked at, like what were the soils like, aquatic vegetation. They surveyed where loons were nesting, all kinds of things, and then they put all this data together and came up with a score of shoreland. And the highest scored shoreland is that which is considered sensitive or of highest habitat value, and that should be protected. Now, in this study in Cass County alone, on just 19 lakes, we identified 83 miles of shoreline.
Wow. Just in Cass County?
Just on 19 lakes in Cass County.
Wow.
That are sensitive shoreland and are very critical to protect. So those landowners of those parcels are the ones that we are reaching out to see if they have any interest in conservation value. And
now, is there a minimum size of land that you look at for the most part? 5 acres or 20?
Well,
or?
Basically parcels that could be subdivided. So 400 feet is probably, about the minimum size. 400 feet of shoreline,
Right.
5 acres is kind of the area that we targeted. Prior to doing this, getting involved in this study, we actually did hire an intern from Bemidji State, and we mapped 60 lakes in Cass County, and we looked at where were the large parcels of shoreline, and we had some various size criteria, and we actually found on those 60 lakes that 35% of the shoreline on the most developed lakes in Cass County is still not developed. So
Really?
That was very surprising.
Yeah,
we didn't
that
think
is.
there was that
That's good
much.
news.
Well, it is good news.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, because we have this window of opportunity right now to protect the best of the best for habitat protection, but develop the rest. So develop and buffer the rest. We were talking about buffers earlier. And among those 60 lakes, we identified over 228 miles of undeveloped shoreline on just these 60 lakes. So there's still a huge potential and some very sensitive shoreline out there that we are targeting to try to protect.
So does this information that you gather, does it get shared with the DNR or soil
Yes.
water conservation districts? It's kind of gets all put on the table for everybody to have access
Yes,
to it?
they do. It's public information, and mostly we've shared it with lake associations. So they are one of our partners in all this effort. They know the landowners, and they can have conversations with them, and they know some of their intentions. And we've shared it with lake associations, and of course the Cass County is our partner in this effort. And we are waiting for the legislature to approve some money from the new legacy amendment to expand this type of work into both Crow Wing and Aiken County as well.
So that money is being used for what it was intended, isn't it, when you're talking about that legacy money going to these kinds of projects?
Yes, it is. Yeah, this is on-the-ground habitat protection.
How about good management practices? Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, let's talk about that. We can conserve what's undeveloped, but where we have already developed shorelines, good shoreline management is really a way to protect water quality. And there's 3 areas that we really look at, and that is curbing pollutants that might get into the lake, at the source, also reducing runoff. When it rains and water runs off properties, it takes with it sediments, and sediments have phosphorus attached to it, and phosphorus is a nutrient that weeds and, aquatic plants, they're not weeds, aquatic plants and algae use to grow. And then the other thing is to capture and cleanse those pollutants so that they don't reach the lake. And we can talk about some of the specific examples of that,
Yeah.
starting with good lawn management, which is a way to curb pollution.
One of the really important ways, isn't it?
It really is,
yeah.
One of the most important things is, and it's important to remember, this is a law that we must use zero phosphorus fertilizers on our lawns. It's not just shorelands. Some people think it's only shoreland that we use zero phosphorus. It's on any residential lawn. There is an exemption for new lawns that have just been put in place.
Just getting started.
That's right, but everybody needs to use zero phosphorus fertilizer. And then pick up your pet waste and keep leaves and grass clippings out of the water and minimize the amount of lawn that you have. Some of the other things that people can do are just quickly, we reduce runoff with those shoreland buffers that you were talking about. Keep those native plants on your shorelands. They help filter things out. They prevent erosion. They protect wildlife habitat. Your shoreline is your very first line of defense for making sure that pollutants don't run off into the water.
It's a changing a value, isn't it? Everybody kind of got
Yes.
used to the idea we got to be right to the water's edge and see every duck that's right below that spot, but that's not the best thing that we can do.
Well, what we encourage people to do is, if you have a natural shoreline, leave it natural. If it's not, you can restore it and try to restore some of that. But you can also have a beach area. We're not suggesting that people shouldn't have a place to recreate and have a beach, but the more native vegetation you have, it holds the soil in place, keeps the erosion from happening and that runoff.
We're down to our last couple of minutes. Maybe we could just talk a
Wow,
little.
that goes fast.
It does. Maybe we could just talk a little bit about how people could get in touch with you if they're interested in working with your organization.
Well, they can certainly call our office at 218-675-5773, or they can email me at info@leechlakewatershed.org, or they can go to our website and contact us. I'd be happy to talk to any conservation-minded landowners out there that are interested in land protection, or lake associations that would like to talk about good land management.
Now, are there other organizations like yours on other watersheds in Minnesota?
Well, the Minnesota Land Trust is one of our main partners. They're a statewide organization, and they hold conservation easements. But there are very few land trusts in Minnesota like ours, so that's why we are trying to work more regionally here than just in the Leech Lake watershed, because this whole region has very similar geography and similar concerns, so we're hoping to branch out to more of a regional presence in the future.
Well, it's really important work that you do. I spend a fair amount of time on Leech Lake, and I've followed for years.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm a member of your organization.
Yes, you are. Thank you.
But what you've done with muskie habitat and sunfish spawning areas, crappie spawning areas, very, very important to the future of our lakes. Paula, thank you very much for taking the time to come on our show. And you keep up the good work. You're doing a good job.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You've been watching Lakeland Currents, and as I said before, this is our last program for the season, and we'll be back with you again next fall with a whole new series of programs. So thanks for watching. I'm Ray Gildow. See you next time.